In the deepest freeze of the Cold War, the CIA hit a severe logistical wall. The United States desperately needed to monitor Soviet intelligence without being detected, but targeted embassies and meeting grounds were virtually impenetrable to outsiders. This vertical scale diagram illustrates the vast altitude gap in surveillance. We had U-2 spy planes mapping territories from 70,000 feet up and satellites orbiting above Earth. But none of those macro-level tools could record two people talking from 10 feet away. Putting a human asset in that 10-foot gap carried enormous risk. If a handler met an informant in a wide-open public park in Washington, D.C., an agent lingering close enough to eavesdrop would be immediately obvious. The agency needed a surveillance platform that could blend in perfectly. They required something that could wander right up to a target completely unnoticed, simply because it belonged in that environment. Inside the CIA, the Directorate of Science and Technology was the division tasked with cracking the agency's impossible technical problems. Their solution to this close-quarters surveillance gap was to recruit the animal kingdom, transforming everyday wildlife into covert tech platforms. Biomimicry, borrowing design and function directly from nature, offered a strategic advantage. A man standing in a plaza in a trench coat is an obvious threat, completely invisible. This realization launched a massive multi-million-dollar ambition to micromanage nature for global espionage. This anatomical schematic highlights the intense surgical engineering behind the effort. In the 1960s, a veterinary surgeon spent an hour operating on a live cat. They implanted a microphone into the animal's ear canal, wired it to a radio transmitter at the base of its skull, and wove a thin antenna through its fur. This single, heavily modified feline, dubbed Project Acoustic Kitty, cost the CIA an estimated $20 million to develop. For decades, an urban legend claimed that the project met a tragic end. The myth stated that during its very first field test outside a Soviet embassy, the $20 million cat was instantly run over by a speeding taxi. But declassified documents tell a different story. The hardware actually worked perfectly. The true problem was the biological variable. The cat simply wandered off, distracted by its own natural hunger. The project was eventually abandoned, the electronics were removed, and the cat lived out a long, happy life. The agency spent $20 million only to find that while you can build a flawless radio, you cannot engineer away an animal's instinct. If live animals were too unpredictable, the directorate reasoned that they needed perfectly controllable replicas. They engineered unmanned underwater vehicles known as Charlie and Charlene. Disguised exactly as catfish, these radio-controlled robots could swim upstream completely unnoticed to collect water samples for chemical analysis. In the 1970s, they scaled down even further with the insectothopter. Modeled after a dragonfly, this drone utilized a microscopic engine to flap its wings while being guided toward a target by a laser beam to record audio. Yet Mother Nature defeated the robotics too. Despite the brilliant microengineering, the insectothopter was completely derailed by natural crosswinds of just 5 miles per hour. Taking the biological brain out of the equation didn't solve the problem. The physical forces of the natural world were an obstacle the agency simply couldn't engineer away. The CIA's only practical operational successes with nature happened when they stopped trying to make it move and instead used its remnants purely for camouflage. During the Vietnam War, U.S. forces desperately needed a way to track opposition movements through dense jungle foliage up to 300 meters away. Scientists developed a tiny seismic sensor that tracked passing footsteps. To ensure it remained untouched, they shaped the transmitter to look exactly like tiger droppings, blending it into the landscape and relying on human disgust to protect it. This animated breakdown illustrates how a similar logic drove the dead drop rat. A dead drop is an espionage technique where items are hidden in a secret location for another agent to pick up. Agents would treat a real rat carcass and hollow out its center, creating a protected cavity for passing microfilm or money on the street. But the local ecosystem intervened one last time. Stray cats kept stealing the money-filled rodents, forcing the CIA to douse their high-stakes intelligence caches in foul-tasting wormwood oil just to keep the local wildlife away. Even when the animal was completely dead and stationary, the CIA still had to actively fight off the rest of the food chain. By the late 1960s and 1970s, the unpredictability of the environment forced the agency to abandon or categorize almost all of these animal programs as operational losses. These specialized programs forced the CIA to address the extreme physics of microengineering decades before the private sector. The engineering hurdles identified by the insectothopter, such as maintaining flight stability in a crosswind and achieving high power density in a tiny frame, became the primary technical challenges eventually solved by modern autonomous microdrones. Humans can invent the most sophisticated microtechnology on the planet, but it's impossible to micromanage the unpredictable chaos of Mother Nature.